How's everybody doing? Weren't the Onos amazing? Great selection of songs, a lot of surprises, beautifully executed. So somebody earlier said, I think it was Mark who said, if you haven't seen Magical Mystery Tour, you're in for a real treat. Now, there are many people when this movie came out in 1967 who would not have agreed with that. I don't know how many of you know the story. Who has not seen this movie? Again, a show of hands. Okay, so most of you have seen it, a few haven't. This movie was put on television on the BBC the day after Christmas in 1967. And most people, they didn't have didn't have color TV in Britain at the time, or very few people did, so it was seen in black and white. And it was not well received. People didn't like it, and in fact, it was the first time, people were saying it's the first time the Beatles flopped, that it was a failure. It was, people did not like it, they didn't know what to make of it. So the film itself was, the idea was Paul's idea based on the Merry Pranksters and Ken Kesey. I don't know if you're all familiar with the early hippie movement in 1965 and 66, but they took this bus to nowhere, basically. And so that was the inspiration for Paul. And as you'll see in the film, it is this bus to nowhere. And it was very, Paul had to go, it was so poorly received that Paul had to basically apologize and try to explain it. But fast forward, years later, Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, and others have claimed that it was a big inspiration to them, and that it was ahead of its time, and that it wasn't properly appreciated in 1967. So we can look at it today in 2015 and decide whether it stands up, what it means, whether it's a bunch of nonsense, whether it's some self-indulgence on the part of Paul et al., and just kind of, you know, taking advantage of all the power they had at that time to do whatever they wanted. And even the BBC, which actually had some reservations about it because they had seen it, but the Beatles had the power to say, no, it's good, people will love it. And of course, that was not the case. And fans didn't actually get to see this movie in the US until many years later when it played at some art houses and different things. Of course, now anybody can own it on DVD. But watching it on a big screen with a group of people, it will be a lot of fun. And maybe afterwards we can have some commentary, some discussion if you want. Anyway, without further ado, 1967's Magical Mystery Tour. So you used the word strange.
Yeah, definitely strange. But what I liked, it was very much improv, more improv.
It was improv. Yeah, I started to say that there was no script, but Paul drew a diagram in a circle, two concentric circles, and sort of put lines like here, this will happen then, this will happen then, but there was no particular beginning or no particular end, and it was, it was 1967. And it was a time of experimentation, and they had the clout, the money, the time to do that, and to convince the BBC to then put it on the air. So, any other thoughts, or, yeah?
Being the first time that I've seen it,
I
found that they not only did a lot of improv, but they did a lot of unexpected, because you don't expect certain situations to happen. And it's quite the creative way that they made it that catches their attention. So it's pretty much saying, you're gonna be up for a really good time with us in this trip. So pretty much like just gather whatever friends you got and just bring it in and we can have a party. That's pretty much what it feels like too.
Yeah, that was the idea, that there was no planning. It was based on the Merry Pranksters, which was this sort of proto-hippie adventure bus that went across the country in 1965. So that was kind of the idea. And like that adventure, this was also an LSD-infused vision, which at the time, some people knew, some people didn't. But certainly after Sgt. Pepper, it was no secret that the Beatles were using LSD and that it was informing their work. Any other thoughts or comments, observations, or yeah? Excuse me?
This came out at 4.
This came out after Sgt. Pepper, but it was during the psychedelic period. During it was filmed and released all within 1967. So, and 1967, when 1967 was over, that was really the end of the psychedelic period. All their work that's considered psychedelic, well, actually, this isn't completely true because Revolver, which came out in August of '66, also has some psychedelia on it. But for the most part, the psychedelic period is considered between, just 67, this calendar year of '67, and so this was on TV Christmas of that year in the UK. Yeah, it was the end of that. It was kind of the grand finale, if you will. It's actually one way of looking at it of that psychedelic period, which many fans were happy to leave behind. As in retrospect, as they talk to me for Beatleness. Any other thoughts? Anybody else for the first time? Somebody back there. Okay, it's hard to see with the lights. Yeah.
Just 2 comments. One is, with all the marketing around the movie, after decades, I thought it was cartoon from beginning to end.
You found it was cartoon, did you say?
Animated from beginning to end.
I did too.
Oh, was there a cartoon? But the other thing I wanted to say is, this was the psychedelic period, but it was really sweet that they captured the standards of the 1920s and the 1930s with Tootsie and the Red Red Robin. So I thought that was really neat.
Right, well, if you think about Sgt. Pepper, it's also very eclectic musically. They harken back to British Music Hall, which this does very much as well. I mean, that was Paul's thing. He grew up with that. They all grew up with that. I mean, part of their genius was that they took all these influences that they grew up with in Liverpool, which was a melting pot, but also what they gleaned from the U.S. and put that all together into this amazing thing. But yeah, it's there's a lot of music hall in this. Of course, your mother should. I mean, that whole sequence is just amazing. Yeah. Any other thoughts, comments? Anybody else first time? Okay.